always swore the story was real. Not urban legend real, not my friend's cousin said it once real. No, he said it with that older brother confidence that hits you at 13, softening your logic until anything sounds believable. Cows sleep standing up, he told me once, tossing a baseball into his glove like he was explaining gravity itself. You walk up quiet, you push, they tip over. It's hilarious. Wouldn't they wake up, I asked. He snorted. You've never been around a cow. They're dumb. That was the summer before 8th grade, back when the world still felt like it had borders, the border of the yard light, the final house on Maple Street, the gravel road that disappeared into cornfields where your parents told you never to go after dark. It was also a time before every fact was instantly challenged by a glowing phone screen. Back then, if my brother said something, if older kids at the pool swore it, if you half saw it in a late-night movie, then it lived in the same category as Bigfoot or quicksand, maybe fake, maybe not, but absolutely worth testing. I grew up in Larkspur, Kansas. Not the pretty postcard version, the real one. The town with a grain elevator you could see from anywhere, a water tower with peeling paint, and a single diner that always smelled like fryer grease no matter how many times they deep cleaned. One stoplight, one high school that doubled as a tornado shelter, a cemetery perched on a hill like it was overseeing us, and surrounding all that, farms. Farms ring the town like darkness rings a campfire. 10 minutes on a bike and you were swallowed by corn taller than your head, soybean fields shimmering under the wind, and pastures fenced with humming barbed wire. That summer, cow tipping became the question I couldn't shake. I brought it up once at dinner, casual-like. Mom looked at me over her iced tea. Where did you hear that? Nowhere, I lied. Dad paused mid-bite. Don't mess with livestock, you hear me? I'm not going to, but I was already thinking about it. If cow tipping was real, I wanted to know. If it wasn't, I wanted to prove my brother wrong. Mostly, I wanted a story, something that made me feel older than 13 without actually being older. And that's how it started. 3 of us. Because 3 is the magic number for dumb ideas, me, Nate, and Lila. Nate lived 2 streets over, laughed like a bark. His dad was a deputy, always exhausted. Their house smelled like gun oil and detergent. Nate hated backing down from a dare. If you called something scary, he'd grit his teeth and say, "So?" Lila was different. She carried a pocket knife, just in case. Freckles, sharp eyes, strong silence. Her mom worked nights, so she lived like someone older than she really was. We planned it like a mission. No flashlights at first. Light spooks animals, my brother said, and light gives you away. We'd go right after midnight, ride out to Harlow's farm and test the myth. We told ourselves we weren't going to hurt anything. We just wanted to see, to prove something, to feel older. But the night had other plans. That afternoon, I stole a flashlight from our kitchen's junk drawer, one of those old metal ones that weighed as much as a brick and looked like it could smash a skull if you swung it hard enough. I grabbed extra D batteries too, because I'd already learned the hard way that flashlights die at the exact moment you need them most. My brother wasn't home to mock me or raise suspicion. He'd driven off in his beat-up truck to drink cheap beer by the river with the older kids who already graduated. He had no idea we were trying to fact-check his cow-tipping wisdom, and if he'd known, he would have come along just to make it worse, taunting us, daring us to get closer. That night, I told my parents I was sleeping over at Nate's. Mom barely glanced up from her paperback. "Be home by noon tomorrow. I'll make pancakes." "Okay," I said, fighting not to sound nervous. Dad muttered something from behind his newspaper, a grunt that counted as parental approval in small-town Kansas. At Nate's house, we hid in his basement, pretending to play Sega while actually watching the clock. Every minute felt like its own hour. Lila showed up around 10 with her usual calm expression, but her backpack said otherwise. "What's in the bag?" Nate asked. "Stuff," she said. "What kind of stuff?" I pressed. She unzipped it just enough to reveal a first aid kit, a pocket knife, a lighter, duct tape, gum, and a coil of rope. Nate stared. "What are we doing? Cow tipping or kidnapping?" "Better to have it," she replied, zipping the bag closed with finality. Truth was, having Leela there made us feel safer. Like we weren't 3 dumb kids trespassing on a farm, but a miniature expedition team preparing for something unknown. Midnight finally came without drama. No movie-style thunder, no spooky music. Just a quiet moment when the house settled. The world dipped into a deeper kind of darkness, and we knew it was time. Nate's dad snored upstairs like a chainsaw stuck in a tree trunk. We slipped out through the basement door and wheeled our bikes across the yard, trying not to crunch gravel or snap twigs. The street was silent, windows dark, porch lights off. Only the moon watched us, a thin, pale slice sharpening every shadow. We pedaled hard at first, adrenaline making us breathless. Then the houses thinned. The pavement surrendered to gravel, which crackled under our tires. The bugs grew louder. The world shrank to just our bikes, our breathing, and the Kansas night stretching endless around us. Harlow's farm rose out of the darkness like a half-finished memory. The barn a deeper shadow, the silo a gray cylinder against the sky, the windmill creaking like something turning in its sleep. We ditched our bikes in the ditch and crouched low, listening. No lights in the farmhouse, no barking dogs, just the distant lowing of cattle. Slow, sleepy, unaware. "Okay," Nate whispered. Around the back, by the cottonwoods. We moved like we'd practiced, even though we never had. The fence was old, wooden posts with 2 sagging strands of barbed wire humming faintly in the warm breeze. We found the spot where the bottom wire drooped and ducked under, careful not to snag our clothes. The moment my feet touched the pasture, something changed in my stomach. A quiet drop, a sense of crossing a line that wasn't meant to be crossed. The air smelled of warm animal, grass, and something faintly sour I didn't recognize. We crept deeper. Cows appeared as dark mounds scattered across the field, breathing slow, steady, almost peaceful. "See?" Nate whispered. "Told you. Out cold." "Are they really asleep?" I murmured back. Lila said nothing. She was already studying the shadows beneath the trees. We approached the first cow, a massive brown shape looming in the moonlight, motionless except for the rise and fall of its breathing. This was it. Proof or myth? We each placed our hands on its flank. Warm, coarse hair, heavy silence. Nate mouthed, 3, 2, 1. We pushed. Nothing. The cow jerked awake with a violent snort, swinging its head and releasing a guttural bellow that rattled my ribs. We stumbled back, hearts pounding. "Okay," Nate whispered, shaky laugh escaping. So that one wasn't asleep. But something else was watching us. We just didn't know it yet. We tried another cow. This one stood farther back, closer to the cottonwoods where the pasture met the darker line of trees. Its head hung low, perfectly still. For a moment, it looked practically frozen, the perfect candidate. We approached slower this time, placing each step like we were trespassing in a church. Again, Nate and I pressed our palms against the sleeping giant. Again, we pushed. Again, nothing. The cow jolted awake with a violent twist, bellowed louder than the last, and lumbered away in panic. Nate exhaled sharply. His grin had faded into something tight and uneasy. "Okay," he muttered, rubbing his hands on his jeans. "Maybe it's harder than guys," Leela whispered. Her voice changed everything. She wasn't irritated. She wasn't cracking a joke. She sounded cautious, the kind of cautious that wraps itself around your spine. We turned toward her. She stood perfectly still, arm extended, pointing toward the cottonwoods. At first, I didn't see anything except the dark shapes of trees and the mottled shadows cast by the moon. Then my eyes adjusted. Something was on the ground, not a cow-shaped mound like the others, something twisted, wrong. We moved closer, slowly this time. The night felt heavier, colder beneath the trees. The shape was a cow, but not like any cow we'd ever seen alive or dead. It lay on its side, legs bent at unnatural angles, and even in the low light, I could see the dark shine of something wet across the grass. A sour, metallic smell hit me a second later, thick and heavy. The smell of blood, the smell of death, not hours old, but minutes. Leela clicked on her flashlight. The beam was like a knife through darkness, slicing the scene into something real, something we couldn't take back. The cow's belly was torn open, not cut, ripped. Long, ragged strips of hide hung loose. Its ribs peeked out, pale and curved. The wound bulged open, a hollow cavity where organs should have been. The edges were chewed, torn away in hungry, impatient bites. My stomach twisted. A sound escaped my throat, small, choked, involuntary. Nate stepped forward a little, eyes wide. A dog, he whispered. Coyotes? Leela shook her head without looking away. Coyotes don't do this. How do you know? Nate demanded, voice cracking. Lila didn't answer with words. She swept the beam of light around the scene. The ground was disturbed, grass flattened, dirt churned up, streaks of darkened blood smeared across trampled earth. Then the flashlight froze on something else. Tracks, not hoof prints, not paw prints like any dog or coyote. These were deep impressions, spaced irregularly, as if something heavy shifted its weight unevenly. Each print had elongated marks, like long toes or claws had dug into the ground. My skin crawled. Nate swallowed. Maybe a bear. There aren't bears here, I said automatically, clinging to the only comforting fact I had left. The beam moved again. Further into the trees, half hidden behind a fallen branch, stood another shape. Another cow. But this one wasn't lying peacefully. It was upright, as if it had stumbled into the tree before dying and then stayed propped there. Its neck slumped at an unnatural angle. A long gash ran down its side, and ropes of intestine glistened in the moonlight, where something had opened it and then wandered off mid-meal. The smell hit harder, sharp, sour, awful. Nate gagged. Lila's hand tightened around the flashlight. Her face had gone pale beneath her freckles. We need to go, she said quietly. But the night had already changed. The pasture was no longer a harmless field, and something in those trees wasn't done eating because the grass rustled. Slowly, deliberately, the kind of movement that wasn't made by a cow or a coyote or anything we'd ever seen before. The rustling came again, not the wind, not the shifting weight of a grazing animal. This was heavier, slower, deliberate. We all froze in place. Leela raised her flashlight toward the sound, but before she could aim it fully, something shifted in the darkness. Something low, hunched, and wrong. At first, I thought it was just a trick of shadows, a stump or twisted branch catching the light. Then it moved, not fast, just enough for my brain to register that it wasn't a part of the scenery. Turn it off, Nate whispered, voice trembling through his teeth. But Lila didn't. She couldn't. Her thumb wouldn't move. The flashlight stayed trained on the shape, and the shape resolved itself one impossible detail at a time. It was crouched over the second cow's torn body. Its posture wasn't animal-like, not really. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent in strange angles. The skin, or whatever covered it, looked pale, almost raw, uneven, like it had been stretched over the bones too tightly. For a second, it didn't register as anything familiar. My brain tried to make it a dog, a man, a bear. It wasn't any of those. It was something else. The creature's spine rose and fell with slow breaths as it pulled something from inside the cow's shredded belly. Not tearing, not ripping. Pulling, leisurely, as if savoring the process. Then it did something that froze my blood. It lifted its head and looked at us. Its face, if you could call it that, was long and narrow, but not elongated like a horse or wolf, more like something halfway shaped and then abandoned by nature. The mouth stretched too far back, split wider than anything natural. Inside were rows of thin, irregular teeth, like shards of bone arranged without symmetry. But the worst part, the eyes, flat, black, depthless, not reflective like an animal's, not alive like a human's, just void. For one terrible heartbeat, everything stopped. Even the night insects fell silent. Then the creature made a noise. Not a growl, not a snarl. A wet, choking sound like lungs filled with fluid trying to laugh. That sound, I still hear it sometimes when I'm half asleep. Lila's flashlight flicked off at last, but it was too late. We'd already been seen. For a moment, the creature stayed perfectly still, as if savoring the silence between us. Then, something hit the ground. Twet. Its weight, it rose from its crouch, unfolding, higher, higher, until it towered nearly to the shoulder height of the cow beside it, maybe taller. Its arms dangled with spider-like length, the fingers thin, jointed too many times, ending in tips that glinted as if slick with meat. It took one step toward us. The grass flattened under its weight, then another step. Slow, confident, like it wasn't worried about whether it could catch us. My throat clenched. Nate whispered the single word that broke the spell, "Run." And we did. We didn't move as a group. We didn't coordinate or yell or look at each other. Our bodies simply chose survival. I sprinted so hard my legs nearly buckled on the first step. Lila was already ahead, flashlight bouncing wildly. Nate was beside me, breath ragged, face white. Behind us, the creature moved, not like a deer bounding, not like a wolf sprinting. It moved in long, powerful strides that hit the ground with thunderous, uneven rhythm, as if its limbs weren't built to run. But it ran anyway. It didn't scream, it didn't roar, it just chased. And the sound of that chased the pounding footsteps, the tearing grass, the weight of something unnatural behind us. It is seared into my memory forever. We tore through the pasture, grass whipping against our legs, our breaths coming out as panicked gasps. My lungs were already burning, but fear had taken control of my body. Fear, older than language, older than logic. Behind us, the creature thundered forward, not like something sprinting, like something falling toward us, each stride a controlled collapse of its long, mismatched limbs. The sound it made wasn't natural, an uneven rhythm of weight and speed that broke every rule of how animals move. I didn't dare look back, not yet. The trees blurred past us as we angled toward the fence line. The same sagging section we crawled under minutes ago, only now it felt impossibly far. The creature released that wet, ragged laugh again. Closer. Lila, sprinting ahead, shouted over her shoulder, "Fence, go!" Her voice cracked with terror, but it cut through the panic, clouding my thoughts. The fence was maybe 40 yards away. The creature sounded like it was 20. I pushed harder, feet pounding so fast I thought I might trip and go down, and feel that thing's fingers close around my ankle, drag me screaming into the grass. The image almost slowed me. Almost. I forced myself forward. The sagging wire fence came into view, a black horizontal slash across the pale grass. Nate was right beside me, wheezing curses under his breath. Leela slid on her knees under the lowest wire, backpack scraping against the dirt. She popped up on the other side in one fluid motion, flashlight gripped between her teeth. "Come on!" she shouted through clenched jaw. Nate didn't slow, didn't wait. He grabbed the top wire with both hands and vaulted over it in one desperate motion. The barbs tore a long slice in his shirt and scraped his skin, but he didn't stop to check. He just hit the ground, stumbled, and kept moving. My turn. I dropped to my stomach, reaching for the gap under the wire. The moment my body hit the ground, the grass vibrated behind me. Not wind, not footsteps, impact. Something huge landed in the grass, not 10 feet away. I felt it before I heard it. I shoved myself forward, not caring that barbs snagged my shirt, tore into my back, sliced my skin. Pain flared, sharp and hot, but adrenaline burned right through it. I scraped under the wire, dirt filling my palms, shirt ripping across my spine. Something cracked behind Mia, sharp metal twang, the fence wire. It shuddered violently, posts swaying. The creature had reached it. For a split second I turned my head. I wish I hadn't. In the thin wash of moonlight, I saw its hand wrap around the top wire. Not a paw, not a hoof, a hand. Long skeletal fingers curling casually around the barbs as if they didn't exist. The wire sliced its skin, but it didn't react, didn't flinch, didn't bleed the way anything natural bleeds. Its head tilted to the side, those flat black eyes watching me struggle beneath the fence like a trapped animal. Its mouth stretched wider, and it laughed. A wet, choking, delighted laugh. I tumbled the last few inches and rolled onto the gravel road, scrambling to my feet so fast I almost fell again. "Joe!" Nate screamed. "Go! Go!" We sprinted to the ditch where our bikes were hidden. The creature struck the fence again. Cringe, the top wire snapped like a guitar string. The post lurched. Barbed wire recoiled into the grass like a released trap. It was coming through. My hands shook violently as I yanked my bike upright. The chain clattered, wheels spinning uselessly for a moment. My breath hitched as I tried to mount the seat. Lila was already pedaling away, her flashlight beam bouncing wildly across the road. Nate launched himself onto his bike, gravel spraying out behind him. I forced my legs onto the pedals, heart hammering so hard I could barely hear anything else, and then I heard it. The creature clearing the fence. A heavy, final impact. The the wet scrape of limbs unfolding on gravel, and a sound like breath, not angry, not hungry, but excited. That was the moment I knew. It wasn't chasing us because we disturbed it. It was chasing us because it wanted to. I pedaled harder than I ever had in my life. Legs burning instantly, gravel spitting from beneath my tires. My breath tore out of my throat in ragged, panicked gasps. The road ahead shimmered under the thin moonlight, a narrow gray ribbon that felt far too exposed. Nate was just ahead of me, shoulders hunched, pedaling like the devil himself was grabbing at his back wheel. Lila rode in front, flashlight clenched between her teeth, beam swinging wildly across the ditch and into the cornfields. Behind us, nothing. No roar, no footsteps, no wet laugh. For a terrifying second, that silence felt worse than hearing it chase us, because silence meant it could be anywhere. Then, rustling. Not behind us, beside us. The sound came from the field to the right, hidden by the tall grass and weeds. A moving shadow in the dark ocean of stalks. At first, it seemed far away, a wave of disturbed plants keeping its own pace. But then the rustling grew louder, faster, keeping speed with our bikes. My lungs tightened. "It's next to us," I wheezed. Leela spat the flashlight into her hand and pointed it toward the field, but the beam bounced too much for me to see anything clearly. I caught glimpses, grass flattening, stalks bending unnaturally, a pale flash between the leaves. "Don't slow down," Nate yelled, voice cracking. I felt the creature's presence through the field more than I actually saw it. A weight, a pressure, like a nightmare running parallel just out of sight. Then it veered closer. The rustling shifted from a distant parallel line to something cutting inward, angling toward the road, toward us. My brain screamed move, but my body was already at maximum. Every muscle felt like it was ripping apart, my legs shaking violently with each pedal rotation. The creature closed the gap without effort. A shadow flickered at the very edge of my vision, long limbs, pale skin, moving in unnatural bursts of speed, like it didn't need momentum, like it simply decided to be faster. Lila screamed as the flashlight beam briefly caught something tall moving between the stalks, a glimpse of a bent silhouette keeping perfect pace with her bike, just inches inside the field. Nate's voice broke into a hysterical shout. "Don't look at it! Just go!" But I couldn't help it. For a split second, I turned my head. I shouldn't have. Between two rows of corn, just for a heartbeat. The creature's head aligned with mine. Its eyes shone flat and black, catching the flashlight's stray glimmer. Its mouth hung open in that too wide stretch. And the way it moved, long limbs clawing forward, body swaying like a marionette controlled by someone drunk, made my stomach drop into my shoes. It wasn't just chasing, it was playing. I snapped my attention back to the road and pedaled harder. My bike wobbled from panic and exhaustion. The creature's pace never faltered. If anything, it drifted even closer. Then, a new sound erupted ahead of us. A buzzing hum. Electricity. And suddenly, out of the dark, the first streetlight at the edge of town appeared. A weak, yellow bulb flickering. But to us, it was salvation. We shot under it like we were crossing a finish line. And the moment I passed into the circle of light, the rustling stopped. Not slowed, not faded. Stopped instantly, like a switch had been flipped. I didn't dare look back. None of us did. We kept pedaling until our legs nearly gave out, until Nate's house rose into view, until the world felt human again. But even as we stumbled into his yard, shaking and breathless, I knew one thing. The creature didn't stop because it was afraid. It stopped because it understood. We slammed our bikes down in Nate's yard without even caring where they landed. The gravel crunched violently beneath our shoes as we half ran, half stumbled toward the basement door. Nate fumbled with the handle, missed it twice, then finally yanked it open. We spilled inside. He slammed the door shut and twisted the deadbolt so hard it rattled. Then there was silence, a heavy, suffocating silence that wrapped around the room like a blanket soaked in fear. The basement smelled like old carpet, dust, and the faint metallic tang of tools Nate's dad kept on a shelf. It should have felt safe, familiar, but it didn't. We stood there, the three of us, bent over with our hands on our knees, trying to drag air into our lungs. Sweat cooled on my back, mixing painfully with the barbed wire scratches that stung with every breath. None of us spoke at first, because what do you say after running from something that shouldn't exist? Nate was the first to break. A shaky sound escaped his throat, a brittle laugh. It wasn't amusement. It was survival. It was his brain trying to process something impossible. "Holy shit," he stammered between breaths. "Holy shit." His hands trembled violently. He wiped his face with his sleeve, smearing dirt across his cheek. Leela didn't laugh. She dropped onto the bottom step of the staircase and put her head in her hands. Her backpack hit the floor with a dull thud. I stood frozen, still clutching the flashlight like it could snap back on and reveal the creature right behind us. My fingers ached from how tightly I gripped it. "What was that?" I whispered finally. The question came out thin, fragile, like I was afraid the basement itself might answer. Nate stopped laughing, his face drained of color. I don't know." He didn't say it with bravado. He didn't even try to pretend. For the first time I'd ever seen, Nate was scared all the way down to his bones. Lila lifted her head. Her eyes weren't watery from prying. They were glossy, overstimulated, like she was still in shock. She stared at us with a hardness that didn't match her age. "We don't talk about it," she said quietly. "What?" Nate blinked. "Why not?" "Because no one will believe us," she said. "And the ones who do, they'll go out there looking." Her meaning settled into the room like cold smoke. The image of my older brother flashed through my mind, drunk, stupidly fearless, grabbing a baseball bat and heading into the pastures at night just to prove he wasn't scared. My stomach twisted, threatening to drop me right onto the basement floor. Lila's voice hardened. "If anyone finds out, they'll go near that farm, and whatever that thing is, it'll tear them apart." No one argued. We didn't make a pact. We didn't swear secrecy. We just didn't speak, because silence felt safer. We sat there until the first hint of dawn crept around the basement windows, pale light pushing back the night just enough for us to breathe normally again. Nate's breathing steadied. My heartbeat finally slowed from that painful drum against my ribs. When Nate's dad came downstairs around 6, bleary-eyed and reaching for his coffee mug, he stopped midway down the stairs. He stared at us. We must have looked like hell, dirt-streaked, sweat-soaked, eyes wide and sleepless. His gaze flicked to our torn clothes, scraped skin, and Lila's rigid posture. "What happened to you three?" he asked. "A nightmare," Nate said quickly. It was the first time I ever heard him lie without hesitation. Nate's dad looked like he didn't buy it. But then his eyes landed on Leela, on the way she sat stiff and haunted, on the dried blood on my back, on the tremor still in Nate's hands. Something crossed his face. He didn't ask again. He just muttered, "You boys stay out of trouble," and went back upstairs, leaving us in that dim basement where the world finally felt real again. But safety? Safety wasn't coming back. Not after what we saw. Not after what chased us. Not after the night when the dark looked back. I walked home from Nate's around 10 that morning, hours earlier than I told my mom. The sun was already climbing, baking the sidewalks, making the world feel too bright and too normal. My legs felt heavy, like every step tugged me farther from the nightmare, but not far enough to escape it. Mom spotted me the moment I stepped onto the porch. "What happened to you?" she asked, eyes narrowing. "Fell," I lied automatically. She wasn't convinced, especially when she saw the scratches on my back as I changed shirts. Barbed wires and subtle, and the angry red lines made her frown deepen, but she didn't push. Not that day. Small-town parents learn a kind of weary acceptance. They know kids get into trouble. They just hope the consequences aren't permanent. But the consequences of that night were already unraveling across Larkspur. For weeks I couldn't sleep right. Every time I closed my eyes I saw flashes. The cow's torn belly, the creature's pale limbs, its black eyes holding mine in the beam of Lila's flashlight, the way it rose, slow, deliberate, almost curious, that awful wet laugh. I'd jolt awake, drenched in sweat, convinced it was standing outside my window. Nate changed too. He stopped daring people, stopped laughing at stupid jokes, stopped walking home alone after dark. Once in the locker room, a couple seniors joked about cow tipping. Nate overheard and went pale. Not embarrassed, not sick, scared. He left without changing. Lila became quieter than usual. She didn't come over as much, and when she did, she seemed coiled, always listening. always watching the edges of the room like she expected something to crawl through the walls. 3 weeks passed before I finally had the courage or the compulsion to ride past Harlow's farm again. It was broad daylight, noon sun overhead, tractors rumbling in distant fields, the safe hours. I told myself I just wanted to see the pasture in the daytime, convince myself it all looked normal. Like the previous night had just been kids scaring themselves over dead cows, but I knew that was a lie the moment the farm came into view. The pasture did look normal at first. Grass waving in the summer breeze, cows scattered lazily across the field. No torn bodies, no drag marks, no dark stains, but there were fewer cows, much fewer, and along the entire fence line, every wooden post had been reinforced with new strands of barbed wire, shiny silver, brand new. Some even doubled, tripled, reinforced with stakes. Bright yellow signs hung every 10 feet. No trespassing per rivet. Property fablos will be prosecuted. A chill ran down my spine despite the heat. Near the barn, Mr. Harlow stood with 2 other men. One was Nate's dad, the other I didn't recognize. They weren't talking like neighbors shooting the breeze. They stood rigid, grave, scanning the pasture like they expected something to appear again. When Mr. Harlow glanced toward the cottonwoods, the area where we saw the creature, his expression wasn't angry, it was afraid. I pedaled past without slowing. That night, just past 2 a.m., I woke up to the sound of distant sirens. They headed toward the farms, their wailing echoing across the cornfields like a warning. By breakfast, Mom already had the gossip. "Did you hear about Harlow's cows?" she asked casually, pouring iced tea into her glass. My spoon froze in the cereal bowl. Dad grunted. "Coyotes, they think. Maybe wild dogs. Took 2 more last night." Mom clucked her tongue. "2 more? That's awful." Dad sipped his coffee. "Harlow's going to start shooting at anything that moves." I stared into the soggy cereal, stomach twisting. Coyotes, wild dogs, the explanations everyone needed, the explanations that made sense. But I had seen the tracks. I had seen the hands wrap around barbed wire like it was yarn. I had seen its face in the flashlight beam. Whatever killed those cows wasn't a coyote, wasn't a dog, wasn't anything people here had a name for. It was something else. Something that knew how to stalk, how to chase, and worst of all, how to wait. The summer dragged on, but it didn't feel like summer anymore. Not like the summers I knew. Sprinklers, bikes, the taste of cold soda, the lazy hum of insects. Everything felt different, like the sun couldn't quite burn away the memory of what we saw. I found myself glancing over my shoulder every time I walked anywhere, even during the day. I'd check behind trees, glance into ditches, flinch at rustling leaves. At night, I shut my curtains tight and checked the locks twice, sometimes 3 times. I couldn't stop imagining those long pale fingers curling around my window frame. Sleep became a gamble. Dreams became traps. Whenever I did manage to sleep, the creature followed me. Sometimes it crouched behind a cow. Sometimes it lurked just beyond the flashlight beam. Sometimes it waited outside my front door, eyes flat and unblinking. Most mornings, I woke up gasping. Nate wasn't doing any better. He stopped going out after dark entirely, stopped joking around, stopped being the Nate I knew. Something in him had been stripped away in that pasture. One afternoon in late July, I saw him at the gas station, sitting alone on the curb with a soda he wasn't drinking. He looked smaller somehow, like someone had let the air out of him. When I sat down next to him, he didn't look at me. "You think it's still out there?" he asked quietly. I didn't answer, because I knew. And he knew, I knew. Leela kept her distance too, but for different reasons. She wasn't scared in the normal way. She was calculating, watching. She carried herself like she expected the creature to show up at any moment, and she was mentally prepared for it. Once, weeks later, I asked her if she'd told anyone. She shook her head. Who would believe it? And she was right. No one in Larkspur would believe 3 kids saw a monster in Harlow's pasture. They'd think we were lying or hallucinating or trying to get attention, but the adults knew something was wrong. They just needed explanations that fit their world. Newspapers whispered about large predators, Ranchers complained about missing livestock. Deputies patrolled the back roads at night. Some farmers installed floodlights and didn't sleep more than a few hours. But none of them were prepared for the truth. The town clung desperately to normalcy, to the idea that this was just nature being cruel. But when I passed Harlow's fence line again weeks later, I could see the truth in the way the posts leaned out, as if something heavy had pushed against them. The grass around the lower wires was flattened in strange arcs, as if something crawled under, or through, or didn't care about fences at all. Then, one night in early August, the wind woke me, a soft breeze rattling my bedroom window. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, trying to convince myself everything was fine. And then I heard it, not outside my window, not in the yard, not in town, far away. Out where the road curved and the field stretched wide, a sound carried on the wind, a sound like wet lungs trying to laugh. My whole body froze, my breath caught in my throat, every hair on my arm stood up. It wasn't loud, it wasn't near, but it was real. I sat up in bed and listened harder, praying I had imagined it. But the faint, broken laugh came again, drifting from somewhere past the last street light, past the farms, past the place where the world ends and the fields begin. The creature was still out there, waiting, watching, learning. The town slept peacefully, unaware, drifting through their quiet little lives, while something unnatural walked the fields just beyond sight. I didn't sleep the rest of the night. I just sat in my room, knees pulled to my chest, staring at the darkness outside and wondering when, not if, that laugh would come closer. August came and school started, and somehow the world expected me to slip back into routine. Homework, lockers, lunch lines, football practice echoing across the field. Life tried to move on with mechanical certainty, like it didn't care what I'd seen or what was still out there. But something in me had changed, and no matter how much time passed, the world never fully felt safe again. People asked me years later why I never liked the countryside the way other kids did, why I never went hunting, why I never took up hiking or camping or late-night drives through the back roads like others in town loved to do. I always gave a simple answer: bugs, allergies. I don't like getting dirty. People laughed. They believed me. Why wouldn't they? It was easier than explaining the real reason. I never told them about Harlow's farm. I never told them about the torn open cows, the tracks that didn't match any creature in Kansas, or the way the fence snapped like a toy. I never told them about its hands wrapping casually around barbed wire, or the long, slow way it rose from the ground, or how it chased us, not with desperation, but with interest. I never told them how the creature moved beside us in the field, easily keeping pace with our bikes like it was entertained. And I definitely never told them about that laugh, the wet, grating sound that didn't belong in this world. Because the most terrifying part wasn't the chase, it wasn't the dead cows, it wasn't even seeing the thing up close. The most terrifying part was what happened after, when the creature reached the edge of town and stopped, not because of the light, not because it was afraid, not because it was injured. It stopped because it understood. It knew the border. It knew the line between the fields and the streets, between the dark and the human world. It knew exactly where we were headed. That pause, that moment of calculated stillness, was worse than anything. Something that mindless doesn't pause. Something instinctual doesn't hesitate. Only something that thinks does that. Something that waits. Something that learns. For years afterward, whenever I drove on country roads late at night, I'd refuse to look into the fields, not even for a second. Because sometimes, out of the corner of my eye, I'd catch movement, a ripple in the tall grass, a shape pacing the car's shadow. I never looked. I never confirmed it, because deep down, I already knew. That night didn't end when we reached the streetlight. It didn't end when we locked Nate's basement door. It didn't end when Harlow reinforced his fences, or when the sheriff blamed coyotes. And it didn't end when the summer faded into memory. Some stories don't end. Some stories follow you. There are creatures in this world that don't belong in any book, any documentary, any field guide. Creatures that slip into the cracks where the dark meets the unguarded edges of small towns. Creatures that test fences and break them. Creatures that chase only long enough to learn. Creatures that don't eat because they're hungry, but because they're curious. Sometimes at night, even now as an adult, I'll hear something out in the distance, past the safety of the yard light, past the familiar streets, past the boundary between human and not human. A rustle, a thud, or on the worst nights, a faint laugh. Wet, broken, patient, and I remember being 13 again, running through a moonlit pasture, feeling that thing closing in on us with delighted hunger. People say you shouldn't shine a flashlight into the dark unless you're prepared for what looks back. And that night we learned why. Because once something in the dark notices you, it never really forgets.